Okay, so good morning, class. Now we'll proceed from what we started last time. Last time we talked about, some of the basic functions or syntax that we have in regular expression. And if you remember, we said, composing a pattern to identify or to process a text is a common thing that we do in regular expression. So as we have said, there are three important steps that you have to follow in what we call text processing. The first thing that you have to do is you have to understand the input text. Okay, the first thing that you have to do is understand the input text. Okay, this is the first step. The second step that you're supposed to do is identify the relevant part. Identify the relevant part of the text, and finally manipulate the text. Okay, this is what we are going to do. This is what you're supposed to do. We have three steps. Whenever some text is given to you for a process, the first thing that you have to do is try to understand what the text looks like. Try to understand the scripting method. Go through it so that once you understand the input text, you will know what kind of algorithm to write. The next thing that you're supposed to do is try to identify what is, the relevant part from that text, because we know that in text processing, we're not interested about every part of the text. We will be focusing only on some part of the text. So try to identify the relevant part. For instance, the assignment that I have given you is to identify a number with a 2-digit fraction, right? This is what has been asked for you. So what you have to do is try to understand what that relevant part is. You have to come up with a method of understanding what the relevant part is. Like if you ask you to identify an IP address from a running text or an email from the running text, you have to identify what that relevant part is, which means what part of the text would be considered to be relevant for your application. Then finally, based on this understanding, try to write a regular expression or a computational program that will manipulate the text. So manipulating the text means reading the text, go through each part of that text and identify the part that is assumed to be relevant. So in the process, we have seen that there are many regular expression syntax that we can use, right? We have seen many type of syntax to identify digits, non-digits, white space, non-white space, alphanumeric, non-alphanumeric, at the beginning, at the end, at word boundary, not at a word boundary. And we have seen many expressions like 0 or more of something, 1 or more of something, 0 or 1 of a specific data, or between a range of numbers. So we have seen many of these syntaxes which you are supposed to use whenever you want to manipulate a text. Now, today we are going to see more regular expression functions, and at the end of this, today's lecture, we'll talk about stemming as one type of natural language processing application. So we have seen this thing, or we started this element last time, but one of the function that we use in regular expression is split. Mind you, whenever a text is given to you, we know that we are supposed to extract only some part of it. And to identify that some part of it, we have to perform a task of splitting. For instance, if you are given a 10-page document, maybe the first thing that you're supposed to do is identify the sentence. So from the document, identify a sentence. So identifying a sentence might seem a simple thing for a human being, but for a machine, you have to tell the machine or your program how to identify a sentence. Maybe is it a dot that you use to identify a sentence, or is it a question mark? Is it an exclamation mark? But mind you, these kind of methods are language dependent. For instance, in Amharic, we don't use period. Rather, we use arat ነጥብ ነው አይደል የምንጠቀመው? Or to separate words, maybe we use ሁለት ነጥብ, or we call it ነቁጥ. So it depends. Sometimes we use what we call ቃል አጋኖ እንጠቀማለን አይደለ? ቃል አጋኖም ልንጠቀም እንችላለን, or any kind of method. So what you're supposed to do is you have to come up with a mechanism to segment a running text into smaller pieces. What if you are asked to split or to identify words in a sentence? So you have to know the point where a word is demarcated. You have to know a delimiter between two words. So for that, you can use a split regular expression method. So for instance, if you see this example, it says RE split. What is the splitting method? What is the splitting method? What is the splitting method that we have in here? What is the splitting method that we have used here?
Any alphanumeric. Any alphanumeric?
Any alphanumeric አይደለም።
Non
alphanumeric ምን ማለት ነው? If it is not a number or a digit, sorry, if it is not a number or an alphabet, then split it ማለት ነው።
And the one.
ስለዚህ ምንድን ነው የሚያደርገው? It starts from the first letter. T, it's an alphabet አይደል? ያልፈዋል። H is an alphabet, I is an alphabet, S is an alphabet. ከዛስ በኋላ dot or a dot እና white space በሙሉ ምንድን ናቸው? These are non-alphanumeric ናቸው አይደለ? So this is a point of splitting ማለት ነው። ልክ እዚህ ጋር ሲደርስ ቾፕ ኦፍ ያደርገዋል። ስለዚህ ዚስን ለብቻ ያዘ ማለት ነው። ቀጥሎ I እና S ን ይይዝና white space ሲያገኝ then it would split it. So you see, you can use a syntax. Sometimes the syntax might not help you. If the syntax doesn't help you, then you have to come up with your own pattern. የራሳችንን pattern ማምጣት ይጠበቅብናል ማለት ነው። So it's going to split it into smaller pieces based on your need. And this is very important. The other type of regular expression function that we have is sub. If you remember, we said sometimes we need to substitute one substring with another substring based on the application that we do. So for example, here, mind you, sub has 3 parameters ብለናል. The things to be searched, the thing to be substituted with, and the input text. So it has 3 parameters. So in this case, we're saying whenever you find, mind you, you have to notice this. ይሄ ምንድነው ብለናል? var or ማለት ነው። or ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ምን አለን? If you find blue or white or red, substitute it with black. የትኛው ላይ? In this text. This is the input text. ስለዚህ ምን ያደርጋል? blue ሲያገኝ በብላክ ይተካዋል፣ red ሲያገኝ በብላክ ይተካዋል ማለት ነው። So the output is black socks and black shoes ይሆናል ማለት ነው። Mind you, this seems very simple, but it is very important in many applications. If you remember, we said for Amharic, we have letters whose sound is the same, but the letter is different, right? እነዚህን ትዝ ይላችኋል? እንደዚህ ብለናል አይደል? እነዚህ ሁሉ አሉ ብለናል አይደል? እንደዚህ ሁሉ አሉም ብለናል አይደል? እነዚህ ሁሉ ሃ ናቸው። But what if I want to normalize them to the same type of letter? ስለዚህ ምን እንላለን ማለት ነው? re.sub እንልና what do we do? በኮቴሽን ምን እናስቀምጣለን?
all
ሃን ካገኘህ ሃን ካገኘህ ሃን ካገኘህ ሃን ካገኘህ ሃን ካገኘህ
ከዛ parenthesis
እንዘጋና ሶሪ እንዘጋና በማተካው እንለዋለን።
በሃ
maybe በዚህኛው በዚህኛው እንደዚህ ተካው whichever you want, it's okay with us. Okay, sorry ካደረግን በኋላ what is the input text? ፈለጋችሁትን እዚህ ላይ ትጽፋላችሁ። እንደፈለገን እንጽፋለን ማለት ነው እዚህ ጋር። Okay, so at the end ምን ይሆናል ማለት ነው? This ha would be substituted with this ha would be substituted with this one, and this ha would be substituted with this. So it means now you are bringing them to one standard ማለት ነው. Okay, and this is how a substitute or a sub regular expression function helps us. The other important regular expression function that we have is find all. Okay, you can use search, you can use match. but search and match would stop immediately when they find the first element. የመጀመሪያውን element ካገኙ በኋላ ይቆማል። Okay? But if you say find all, it means from the text, identify anything that looks like or that matches the pattern. So in this case, what does /d mean? /d ምንድን ነው? Digit ማለት ነው. Then if you have a plus sign, it means
one or more
of a digit ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ምን ያደርጋል? ከዚህ ጀምረና one is a digit, more ፈልግ ስለተባለ አያቆምም። 2 ላይ ደረሰ። ስፔስ ሲመጣ ምን ሆነ ማለት ነው? It's a non-digit. So it has to stop. ስለዚህ 12ን ይይዛል። ቀጥሎ ይሄዳል። Space is non-digit. D is a non-digit, O is a non-digit, G, S ይልና ልክ እዚህ ጋር ሲመጣ 1ን ይይዝና ያቆማል። then እነዚህን ይይዝና 1 ላይ ሲደርስ ያቆማል። እነዚህን ይተዋል። So the rest parts would be excluded because we said we are looking for 1 or more digit ነው የምንፈልገው ብለናል። So it will identify 12, 11 and 1 ብሎ ይዛል ማለት ነው። So whenever you use a find all, it means ያገኛቸውን በሙሉ it's going to copy to a list. ካላገኛቸውስ ባያገኝ ኖሮ ምን ይሆን ነበር? ባይዘው እንዲህ ይሆን ነበር. The output would be an empty list because it was not able to find anything in here. Okay? So this is one thing. The other is instead of always writing re find re sub እያልን pattern ከመስጠት we have a method of compiling your regular expression, which means if you compile your regular expression, it's going to be a function. Look in the function እንጠቀምበታለን ማለት ነው. For instance, this is a pattern. Pattern ምንድን ነው የሚለው? ምን ማለት ነው? \w ስንል any alphanumeric 1 or more times, then the @ any alphanumeric 1 or more times, then a dot, then either a com, org, nate, or edu ብለን pattern ሰጥተናል. So instead of writing this every time, you can compile your regular expression to act as a function. ስለዚህ ምን አለን እዚህ ጋር capt3 ያልነውና re compile ብለን what are we going to compile? The pattern. Pattern compile ከተደረገ then it's going to work as a function ማለት ነው። ከዚህ በኋላ ምን እንላለን? capt3 ብለን dot ማለት እንችላለን. You see? In this case ምን አለን? capt3 dot search ብለን እዚህ ጋር as you can see we don't give it a pattern because the pattern is already in this variable. Pattern compile ተደርጎ variable ስለሆነ we don't have to put the pattern. So once you decide on the pattern, then you can compile the pattern, and that pattern can be used for several things. You can use it for searching, you can use it for find all, you can use it for substitution, you can use it for splitting, for anything you can use it ማለት ነው. So this is a good method. Once you are sure that the pattern is correct, then you can compile it and use it with many other functions. So these are some of the patterns that you can do. For instance, this is what we have said about an email, right? This is, one alternative to identify an email. Alphanumeric, any number of times, the @. Alphanumeric, any number of times with the dot, then, a choice of either to have a com, or net, or edu. Then once you compile it, P1 is a compiled pattern. You can say P1 search, P1 find ማለት እንችላለን, or P1 sub, P1 split ማለት እንችላለን ማለት ነው. So this is one method that you can use. And you should also see on the split. As you can see, the split ምን ተጠቀመን? re.compile አለና the splitting is either using, mind you, within a square bracket ካስቀመጠን ምንድን ነው ብለናል? Within a square bracket, it means any one of this ማለት ነው. If you put it in a curved bracket, it means it is a string as it is. But if you put it in a square bracket, it means any one of this. So as we put it in a bracket, it means it's either a dot, a question mark, or an exclamation mark. እነዚህ በሙሉ ምን ይሆናሉ ብለናል? These are a method of splitting a text. So whenever it finds a question mark, ምን ይላል? This is the end of the sentence ይላል. Whenever it gets an exclamation mark, it says this is the end of a sentence. ስለዚህ ምን ይላል? Tired, go to bed now የሚለውን ለየብቻ split ያደርግልናል ማለት ነው. So you can use it as a sentence delimiter or a sentence splitter. That's why we call it a sentence boundary. So as I said, you can use a find all whenever you want to have one or more results. So whenever you use a find all method, it returns a list of 0 or more substring that match the regular expression. 0 maybe the regular expression might not be satisfied by your text. So in that case, the list is going to be empty. This is a text, okay? My two favorite numbers are 19 and 42. So here we said, RE find all a number between 0 and 9, any number of time. A plus sign means 1 or more times. ስለዚህ ምን አደረገ 2 አገኘ 19 አገኘ 42 አገኘ because 2 is a number because it's between 0 and 9 19 is a number and 42 is a number. By the way, እቺኛዋ ማለት this is equivalent with \d ከሚለው ጋር equivalent \d plus ማለት ነው. So this is a different way of saying, you know, any digit ማለት ነው. But what if I say find all A, E, I, O, U በupper case ነው የሰጠነው. Okay? Okay, A, E, I, O, U. So as you can see in this text, we don't have any uppercase A, E, I, O, U. ስለዚህ ምን ሆነ? The result is empty. So it's going to give you an empty list. So this is what you have to understand. Mind, you have to exercise a lot on this one. It's not a theoretical thing, or it's not only a conceptual thing. You should be able to try all these things using Python regular expression. Then I will discuss about errors. Mind you, whenever you do this, it's common that your program will make an error, will commit an error. And whenever you want to fix an error for your program, you have to focus on these two types of errors. The first one, we call it false positive. What does false positive mean? It means your program assumes that it is a correct response, but actually it is not. Okay? Your program might say, this is correct. ለምሳሌ ምን ሊል ይችላል? Meet me at home. ለምሳሌ እንደዚህ ብዬ ብጽፍ. Okay? If this is a text, and if your program says me at home is an email bill, ይሄን ምን እንለዋለን? We call this one false positive, because your program assumes that it is an email, but actually it is not. So such type of errors, we call it false positive. Your program assumes that it is correct, which means your program says that it is positive, but actually it is not. ስለዚህ we call it false positive, or we call this one type 1 error ይባላል. Okay? Type 1 error means it means false positive. Okay? You have to keep this in mind. The other one is, we call it type 2 error. Type 2 error means false negative, which means I might have this email, for instance. ለምሳሌ gmail.com ልበለው. Let's say that this is the email address, but just because dot ስላለ, what if your program says this is not an email? ቢለኝስ? Then we call this one false negative እንለዋለን, which means your program says this is not an email address, but actually it is an email address. Maybe the pattern that I put, the regular expression pattern that I put, didn't consider a dot to be a valid part of an email. አሁን ለምሳሌ Gmail ላይ ይፈቅዳል አይደል? Yahoo ላይ አይፈቅድም። ዊ ነው። ስለዚህ መሃል ላይ ዶት ስላስቀመጠ ብቻ if your program says ቅድም የጻፍነው ማለት ነው፣ ይሄ እንደዚህ ብለን የጻፍነው እንደዚህ አይደል የጻፍነው፣ then at አይደል ያለው። Now this program እንደዚህ ነው ያልነው አይደል? If you remember, sorry, plus እንደዚህ አይደል የጻፍነው ኢሜል አድሬስን አይደንቲፋይ ለማድረግ። ከዛ በኋላ ምን አለን? com or net or org ብለን ነው የጻፍነው አይደል? This is what we have said. But in this case, as you can see, the part that we have before the at sign ምንድን ነው የሚለው? Any alphanumeric ነው የሚለው, alphabet and number. If it has non-alphanumeric ነገር ካለው, your program is going to say this is not an email address. So just because it has a dot before the at sign, your program might say this is not an email address, but actually it is an email address. So such kind of an error, we call it false negative. ለምን false negative እንለዋለን? Because the program says this is not true. The program says this is negative, but actually it is true. ለዚህ ነው ኔጌቲቭ ያለው ተሳስቶ ነው ማለት ነው። That's why we call it false negative. የመጀመሪያው ላይ we say false positive to mean that your program says positive, but that is false. So these are the two common type of problems that we encounter in analyzing any program. The first one is type 1 error. The second one, we call it type 2 error, and this means false negative. Okay, we call it false negative to mean that your program falsely or wrongly disregard a correct result. The first one, type 1 error, we call it false positive, which means your program falsely identify a wrong value as correct. This is false positive. Okay, these are the two type of errors that we want to focus on. Okay, we'll say more about this one after the break.